My guest today is Chad Buechel, the Vice President and Division Manager at Leidos. Chad, thanks so much for taking the time to join us for the DoD Cloud Exchange.
Hey, thank you so much for having us on here today. Super excited about our discussion and looking forward to talking to you more about where we're headed from a cloud perspective.
There is so much going on from a cloud perspective that we will have plenty to talk about, and I look forward to it as well. And then we're going to start with a big program that we've seen some progress on, that maybe it's been a little bit overshadowed by some of those other big programs, the Defense Enclave Services, the Fourth Estate Network Optimization, big efforts around from the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA. Let's start with what's the latest, with some of the trends you're seeing, with some of the challenges you're seeing. Where is these two programs going?
Sure. No, thanks for asking. First and foremost, we're thrilled and excited to be partnering with DISA as well as DoD to really drive and build a new platform for common IT and really where we're headed from a fourth estate perspective and supporting the defense agencies and field activities, or DAFAs. As you mentioned earlier, DES is often overshadowed by some of our larger programs. We've got our NGEN SMIT program that's doing large transformation and modernization for the Navy. We've got our military health support program, Genesis, doing the electronic records and really kind of driving scale there. And as we think about where we're headed from standing up a new and large program such as DES, at Leidos, we really think about from a trend standpoint, what is the customer looking for? What is the end user looking for? And really, how do we start to grow that? I think from a trend standpoint, one of the biggest things that I'm seeing as we think about large scale migrations and modernization really is data protection and data security. And looking at that from the full life cycle and thinking about, how that evolves through, storage, access, analyzing, and really leveraging that data at scale to improve the mission that it supports. That kind of going in parallel to that, from maybe a challenge perspective with that, as we often see, we are trying to rapidly deploy and innovate and modernize at speed. And oftentimes we have to do that while still balancing the challenge of making sure the mission that we're supporting continues on without any degradation. And then on top of that, not only are we trying to innovate and deploy at speed and scale, but also trying to ensure that the user experience continues to be what it needs to be to support the end users. So as we think about these large modernizations and large efforts of common IT and really scaling, I think those are the trends and challenges that we're starting to see as we stand up new programs and start to build upon the lessons learned in the past and really integrating those into where we're headed from a future perspective.
I think it's really important that you bring up you started with data protection, data security. I think data is call it like you will, the new oil, the engine that runs the economy. You use the adage these days. Maybe start there by talking about how's the cloud and how are the capabilities within the cloud really giving you that extra, if you will, oomph to get the data protection, data security right.
Sure. I think when we think about the cloud and that data protection, I think there's a couple things that we're afforded that the cloud brings to bear. I think first and foremost, one of the things that we think about as we start to migrate the data to the cloud and we start thinking about cloud usages, we're moving away from sort of your traditional, on-premise solutions, and we're starting to do more and more in the cloud. And what that offers us, it's the ability to rapidly, I think, deploy and innovate more of our cybersecurity tooling, and ability to do more analyzation and rapid data visualization of what's going on to, more proactively sort of manage and protect that data that we have up there. I think there are inherent risks that have to be accounted for as we think about the cloud and how we use it. But based on the ability to add tooling and bring to bear new capabilities, gives us the ability to do that data protection, I think, in a more timely manner and more rapidly deploy some of those innovative and emerging technologies.
The other piece, the other side of the coin, and you said in parallel, a big challenge is this need to rapidly deploy innovative, modern, at speed while balancing mission needs. That's been one challenge I think a lot of agencies, whether DoD or civilian, have. What are you seeing from that? How to achieve that balance? Because it's always secure and not impact user needs.
Yeah, I think when I think about it and I look at what we're trying to accomplish, I think a lot of it is really stepping back and kind of taking a pause as we start and think through what are we trying to achieve, what are we trying to get at, and really laying out a game plan with our customers to really understand what's the need, what is the plan, how we're going to approach it. And then from there, I think it's really a matter of setting in motion a solid plan that is going to work at the speed and the agility of the customer and the end user, while still being able to deploy, a tool or a capability that's ready for production and ready to be in the environment. I think sometimes, we often rush to rapidly deploy things that may not be fully tested, or that really, need to be vetted with those users to ensure that user experience. So I think just stepping back, taking a little bit more time up front, working through the requirements, working with the proper stakeholders. It's one of the things we often do here at Leidos, is really focused on that user and getting that input up front, so we know that what that plan is going to look like, so we can deploy at speed while still maintaining the user experience.
Chad, one of the things we hear a lot about is DevSecOps, this idea of, put the user with the developers. Generally speaking, where does that fit in? You talked about the defense agencies and field activities, DAFAs, as you mentioned, and their roadmap as well to get to DES. I'm sure there's a DevSecOps piece or some sort of agile development piece in there where you're bringing together the users, the developers, all the stakeholders.
No, that's right. And I think DevSecOps is a great example of how we're trying to integrate all three of those components through that agile process. So as we look at it and we think about how we're going to plan to do, migrations and how we're looking at the innovations, I think that's a key component for how we're doing that DevSecOps. You're right in the sense of really bringing those people together, the user up front, the development, the security, all those pieces together in those agile processes. Ensure that as we're continuing to sort of innovate and rapidly deploy throughout that process, we're working through those various components along the way and getting that feedback up front. So it's not sort of all done at the very end and having one big, use case or test case at the end. We're doing that throughout the process. So we're getting that feedback near real time, and we're able to move more rapidly through that process.
When we talk about the fourth estate, we're talking about agencies like DLA, we're talking about the Joint Service Provider, the Washington Headquarters Services, we're talking about DCMA, DCAA, really anyone that's not a military service like Army, Air Force, Marines, and Navy. Are the field activities different than the defense agencies in terms of their roadmap to migration? Are they starting in a different spot? Is there different challenges to digital transformation for them?
No, I mean they're all really bundled in that same core group of components from that standpoint. So not really a different roadmap. It's really a matter of how they're thinking about the overarching framework and the roadmap for the large scale migrations that are going to happen. We think about sort of is there anything unique or maybe trends there? I think part of it comes down to, as I look back at some of our lessons learned of some of our large programs and how we've done things. I think two things stand out to me in terms of the support that we've done. I think first is really that consistent communications and really ensuring that we're in line with the customers and the stakeholders and what they want. But I think the second thing touches on the question you're asking. That's really about understanding that each organization, as we look through the history of what we've done on other programs, it's really recognizing that different organizations have unique levels of IT maturity and mission support that need to be accounted for in that process. And I think as we look back and think about what we've done, it's that one size fits all doesn't always work, and it's really understanding and balancing the unique needs of the end user or the customer in terms of what those what their maturity level is, what the stated plan and objectives is, and really kind of merging those together and developing a plan that makes sense for that organization. We have an overarching framework of what we're trying to accomplish overall from an IT perspective, and as we think about large IT across DoD, there's stated objectives, but I think the real special sauce here in terms of how we implement it, how we solution that is really understanding what those unique requirements are, balancing that with the overarching mission objectives, and coming up with a plan that makes sense, that achieves both of those and accounts for both of those, and then being transparent, communicating regularly with the customers, the stakeholders, the end users, and working through that process together.
I'm glad you brought up this idea of lessons learned, because as you went through in the very beginning of our conversation, some of the other big programs that you all are working on, they all have very similar, I'm sure, challenges, very similar cultural issues. Again, I keep hearing this, and it's a little sick of hearing it. It's never the technology, right? If you want to move to the cloud, you can move to the cloud. We all know we can do that by now. It's that culture piece. Are there some other lessons learned you'd point to? You mentioned consistent communications, and you mentioned, don't go down the path of one size fits all, but really try to, dirty word, sorry, Chad, customize a little bit to the uniqueness of each agency, but stick within the overarching plan. Any other more specific, maybe take us down to the 10,000 foot view of lessons?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I look at it, it's kind of diving down, but maybe not, quite as deep as you want. But really thinking about and institutionalizing that continuous service improvement and innovation, I think is another big thing. So, you mentioned a lot of them, that organizational change management, and really that oftentimes can be tougher than some of the technical components there. But really what we're looking for is, how do you clearly, deliver clearly defined and compelling, offerings and things that are continuously service innovation. And we hear about it a lot, but what we find is, when we set out a plan 2 or 3 years in advance, it's really making sure that, whatever that is from those lessons learned, we are continuing to drive that innovation, that continuous process improvement is probably the other big thing there. Knowing that, what we did a year ago isn't necessarily what we're going to do now and how we're going to move forward. DevSecOps is a great example that you talked about earlier. Is, are we going to work through an agile methodology, or are we going to go through a waterfall methodology? And how do those different experiences evolve over time is really how we're looking at that continuous innovation and process improvement that really is going to yield continuing to drive scale and modernization at the speed and agility that we're trying to do.
From a DES, fourth estate network optimization, are you able to maybe give us a little bit of where we are today? I think a lot of folks are hearing us talk about all the things that are happening, but is there an update in any data statistics you have in front of you?
Yeah, I think what I can touch on there is that, we won the work and started the work, mid last year. So continuing to, partner with DISA in terms of what that roadmap's going to look like, where we're going to go. We've been performing on the work since July of last year. So we've had strong program performance thus far in terms of really getting in there, working with a customer, maintaining the operational environment, and really starting to work with DISA to build that transformational roadmap and what that looks like moving forward. So we're partnering very closely with DISA, really building out that journey. But the first 6 months really focus on that operational performance, really getting there, understand the baseline, and then starting to drive some of those improvements as we move forward in concert with DISA.
And I imagine there's some of that low-hanging fruit improvements you guys could look at right away and say, oh, if we just tweak that, update that, a little more bandwidth, that will help improve that network as well. But to get to that optimization, the really deep, that's going to take a few years. Or is there anything specific on the agenda for 2023 and beyond that you would highlight, say, hey, if we could accomplish this year or this in the next 12 to 15 months?
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd highlight there. I think the first thing that we're really focused on, or that I'm focused on as a leader of our business, is really ensuring kind of the basic blocking and tackling, ensuring that we have a solid foundation, and understanding of the baseline environment. Because from there, what's important to me as we think about it is, how do we really start to think about automations and driving some of our automation into the baseline management? How do we automate more of the manual functions that we have there? Because what that then translates to me is it gives us the ability to, reinvest the people and the efforts that we're doing to really start to scale and modernize that network. So, my big focus on 23 right now is really focused on that automation and driving that perpetual innovation within the team to identify what are those manual processes, what are the things we're thinking about right now that are taking up time, that we can do some scripting or some automating to relieve the manual hours there, and then start thinking about the bigger picture engineering efforts that we want to do to start accomplishing our overarching goals.
I think that's hugely important to really get out of that low value work. We heard that as a term over the years, and you hear a lot of CIOs and other agencies really start to focus on, is there something we can do that we can just move it off the plate of some of our employees? So it's good to hear that. And that actually leads us to the bigger question too, because if you can get that piece done, then you can start looking at, okay, what are some other emerging technologies, AI, ML, you fill in the blank, that you can start obviously applying and using with it as part of this modernization effort?
That's right. And that's kind of what my goal is. It's really about, we want to be looking at the bigger picture, and we want to be driving some of that, not just thought leadership, but how do we drive those emerging technologies, and where are we spending our time in terms of evaluating what are those technologies? How do they drive or give us the ability to do things differently than we've done in the past? We often think about, what got us here, right, to the point that we're at. isn't necessarily what's going to get us there. And I think, you touched on emerging technology is constantly coming out. We're seeing different capabilities, week over week, year over year of what's coming out, and being able to stay abreast of those, not just from a technology standpoint, but also being able to have the expertise and the engineers on staff that are able to, work with the partners, work with the technology providers to really understand what capability they offer, how that fits into the bigger picture, how we start to think that's going to integrate into it. But also, one of the big things that we're looking at is, as we think about the large programs we have, really drawing or, pulling the thread between programs. So as we think about an NGen program, how are we looking at what they're doing over there and pulling some of that information and technology and way of doing things into what we're doing, and then vice versa? How do we push that back and forth? And when we think about emerging technologies and the work that our chief technology officers are doing and the innovations that we're investing in, it's really a core aspect of what we want to get to from an overarching perspective.
Well, Chad, you opened the door, so I'm going to walk through it if it's okay. You mentioned
Sure.
some of the emerging technologies and innovation that you're investing in. Give me a hint. Give me a little bit of a taste of what are some of those.
Sure. So a couple things that I'll touch on there. Continued investment, at least at Leidos from that standpoint, is the software factory concept that we have. You hear a lot about it. We've invested a lot in these hubs or centers of excellence of our software factories that we're using to support programs across the board. So continue to use those as that innovation aspect. We talk a lot about sort of, the zero trust framework and zero trust architecture, looking at how we can rapidly invest in those from an R&D standpoint to deploy and use those on our programs. We talked about AI, ML. How do we use some of that artificial intelligence and machine learning to automate many of the processes that we're doing? So really looking at that, and then cloud, right? We talked about we talked about cloud and where we're headed from a cloud perspective. How do we do that in a way that gets us rapidly migrating sort of some of our on-premise programs into the cloud, and then being able to leverage that across the board to drive some of the mission enhancements and efficiencies we're trying to achieve.
There's so many opportunities, I'm sure, that you all are looking at, as you said, looking at whether it's NGen or some of the other programs you're working with to bring over those lessons learned, and then again try out some of those technologies as well. The other side of this, and since we're here at the DoD Cloud Exchange, and we're talking about the importance of cloud to DoD, is all this is going to be improved because of the speed and the agility of cloud services, really to enable those, if you will, deliver capabilities faster. We talked a little bit about DevSecOps, but maybe again take another half a step back and by improving the defense enclave services, by working with fourth estate network optimization, how is cloud really going to not just be the foundation, but really bring those agencies and field services more capabilities than ever before?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to answer that, and I think as I step back and think about it, you're right. It's the cloud has a lot of advantages in where we're headed from what we're looking at. In my perspective, I think there's a couple things to highlight. When we think about the cloud, one of the big things is it gives us the ability to, from a speed and scaling standpoint. We talked earlier about data and passing data back and forth. Cloud gives us the ability, as we think about large scale migrations, to more rapidly move data back and forth, up to from an on-prem solution or wherever it is up into the cloud. Gives us some advantages there. I think also, though, what it does is there's a lot of opportunities as we think about the cloud and where we're headed. It makes tooling more accessible. So we have access to more and more that's cloud native and things that are being done in the cloud only that we don't have access to, with the on-prem solutions. We talked about, I think there's an enhanced ability as we think about scaling to, hundreds of thousands of users, better use of advanced data analytics and some of the analytic tools that are only available in those environments. It also allows us to, I think, to baseline and modernize more quickly with the market and start to implement some of those as a service models that we have from that standpoint to, do things a little bit differently. It also helps us to reduce the overall, somewhat the overall upfront investment, but also that life cycle refresh and tech refresh that has to happen. We can do it a little bit more efficiently, in a cloud-based environment. So I think those are some of the things that we're going to start to see and look at from a trending standpoint. They're going to add that, add to that, along with rapidly deploying new technologies more easily in the cloud that can be pushed around, from that standpoint.
I was at a recent event where some of another civilian agency was talking about the move to the cloud. It was never about cost savings. It was never about this idea that, oh, well, we're going to save money. They always started with this idea of making the business run better, or making the mission run better. I'm sure you all are taking the very similar approach with the Defense Enclave Services and Fourth Estate Network Optimization. When you have those conversations, what are they like around that business need, the mission need?
Sure. So I think stepping back, from a Leidos perspective, I think you hit it on the nose. It's about delivering a better, more effective and efficient, mission performance. It's one of those things that we continue to, work with our mission partner DISA on, as we think about where their roadmap is headed. Some of those discussions that we'll continue to have over the course of the next year or so.
And I think what it comes down to is you can sell cloud all you want, right? We all know the beauty of cloud, but it's really getting them to understand where they're going next. And I think some of that, as you said, less upfront investment, lifecycle refresh, the as a service model is very attractive to a lot of DoD agencies. Are you starting to hear more and more folks talk about that as a service approach just because of all those benefits?
We are, yeah, we definitely are from an as a service standpoint. One of the things, one of the investments that we made from a Leidos standpoint is we bought the 1901 group just over 2 years ago or so. And one of the big capabilities that they have there with their Insight platform really is delivering that as a service model, that cloud-based solution. So those are things that we're starting to think about, and as we think about our overarching business and where we're headed, things that we're starting to implement and bring forward as new capabilities and ways of doing things differently.
Chad, when we started our conversation, you brought up this idea of data, data security, data, really using data in a good way. And you brought us back around to this idea of better data analytics and driving a lot of the decision making across the DoD, whether it's Defense Enclave or Fourth Estate. When we talk about the end result, right? When we talk about what there's no end, we know that. And let me preface that with there's no end, we know that. So we don't want to say what will when will you be done and you can go home. But if we talk 3, 5, 7 years from now, what's your hope? What's the hope of DISA that the Fourth Estate Network Optimization, Defense Enclave Services will look like for these 20 defense agencies and field agencies?
Sure. I'll give you my perspective on how I view things. When I look at the future, we have the ability, as we look at what we're trying to accomplish, we have the ability to move a couple 100,000 users onto a single service provider and really deliver that common IT framework to more than 20 organizations across the Fourth Estate. I think that's an incredible opportunity and something that's unique as we look at that. And as I look out 5 years or so, if we can achieve that goal and work towards that goal, to me, that's going to be an incredible accomplishment. I think the second thing that I look at it is, one of the big things that I think about from this is the cybersecurity aspect. Really, as we think about cybersecurity and some of the threats that we're facing today in the environments that we have, so we think through the future, being able to, strengthen that cybersecurity posture, across this entire set of organizations in the Fourth Estate, to me is really going to be one of the big aspects of it. And then the third thing is, which I think is probably the most exciting, is we have an opportunity to innovate and modernize and transform what we're doing, starting off at a small scale. We really are at that ground floor right now. With a smaller number of user base, we really have the chance to make something. We often take over these large programs and networks that are already established and well established for 20, 30, 40 years or so. I think with this, we have an opportunity to really kind of lay that groundwork up front and be part of that sort of infancy in the building of it. So in 5 years from now, what we're going to look at is really a lot of what we brought to bear, as opposed to inheriting something that's been around since, for a longer period of time.
It's not often that any organization, whether it's someone like Leidos or someone like DISA, gets to start with that, we'll call it blank sheet of paper. And it seems like in a lot of ways, the Defense Enclave Services, Fourth Estate Network Optimization, DISA is asking you and your partners, say, what's the art of the possible? What can we do? Where can we go based on how much things have changed over the last 5 or 10 years? So a lot to look forward to. And just in the last minute we have, Chad, together, what's the big takeaway? What do you hope that the folks understand about DES and Fourth Estate Network Optimization as we go forward?
Sure. My big hope is that This is something new and exciting that we're embarking on together with DISA. It's a partnership. It's a journey. My big takeaway for this is, we are continuing to work with the customers to innovate and modernize and really transform where we're headed. And I'm excited about what's to come from an overall, DISA, DES, and Leidos perspective as we move forward.
All right, very nice, Chad. I very much enjoyed our conversation, but unfortunately we are out of time. So let me thank my guest. Chad Buechel is the Vice President and Division Manager at Leidos. Chad, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on the DoD Cloud Exchange.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Have a great day.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.